The Second World War was one of the most tragic events in the history of mankind. The further the events of this war go into the past, the more precious the memories, documents, and evidence of those days become for us. What does the word war mean to us? Fear, pain, death. There were not only deaths of strangers, but also of brothers, fathers, husbands, and sons. Millions of families lost their loved ones during those terrible years. Many countries took part in the Second World War, and each of them experienced the devastation and pain caused by such an event. And even those countries that were not close to cooperation flaunted ideology and the way of thinking united for a single goal: to defeat Nazi Germany. In this project, we would like to show the relations between two cultures, Russian and American, and attitudes towards the Second World War. The participants of this project would like to pay tribute to the Allied countries, owing to whose concentrated actions and mutual assistance they managed to win the Second World War.
The alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Second World War developed on account of necessity and realization that each country needed to defeat one of the most dangerous and destructive forces of the 20th century.
The bravery of Soviet and American soldiers and wisdom of both countries' politicians paved the way to today's world peace, progress, and evolution.
The people of the time could endure enormous moral and physical stress, which lasted for almost 4 years.
On November 7, 1941, American President Roosevelt issued a statement. "I have today found the defense of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics vital to the defense of the United States." That same day, the Soviet Army held a military parade on Red Square to boost morale.
It is of no question that the United States and the Soviet Union cooperated closely during the tragic events of the Second World War. Many civilians and military men were affected by this relationship.
Roosevelt came to trust Stalin as time passed during the Second World War. He held the notion that Stalin and the Soviet Union would cooperate with the United States in establishing democracy and peace around the world. America and the Soviet Union developed significantly in the World War II periods, since the shared ideas were assessed and acknowledged adequately.
The agreements between Stalin and Roosevelt created hostilities and disagreements between the Soviet Union and the United States at the end of the Second World War, which resulted in the outbreak of the Cold War. Despite this negative result of the relations and agreements between Stalin and Roosevelt, there remains no doubt that the alliance between the Soviet Union and the US contributed to the victory of the Allies during the Second World War.
One of the most important conferences would be the Tehran Conference in Tehran, Iran, in 1943. During the conference, the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union would discuss the ongoing conflicts with Germany and Japan, possible military strategies, and the plans for a post-war world. During the Tehran Conference, Stalin was able to persuade Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill to finally open a second front in Europe.
Once the Soviet Union formed the alliance with the United States, Germany, as well as Japan, had no chance against the Allied forces.
Under the Lend-Lease Act, the United States sent enormous quantities of war material to the Soviet Union, which was critical in helping the Soviets withstand the Nazi onslaught. The alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Second World War developed on account of necessity and realization that each country needed to defeat one of the most dangerous and destructive forces of the 20th century.
These coordinated military actions came about as the result of intensive and prolonged diplomatic negotiations between the Allied leaders Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, who became known as the Big Three. Wartime relations between the United States and the Soviet Union can be considered one of the high points in the long-standing interaction between these two great powers.
Americans then sent 14,000 airplanes, 4,400 jeeps, 12,000 tanks, more than 2 million tons of petroleum, and more than 4 million tons of food for the needs of the Soviet army.
America and the Soviet Union developed significantly in the World War II periods, since the shared ideas were assessed and acknowledged adequately.
As recent studies show, US aid went far beyond military cooperation, and in many industries contributed to the establishment of Soviet industry. Indications of the depth and ubiquity of American aid to the USSR can be found in the military literature. In 1947, a book by Soviet politician and statesman Nikolai Voznesensky, The Military Economy of the USSR, was published, which for many years determined the perception of military economy in the Soviet Union and the main economic consequences of the war.
The value of Voznesensky's work primarily lies in assessing the economic losses of the USSR. The entry of the USA into the Second World War has undoubtedly influenced its course and considerably facilitated the position of the anti-Hitler coalition.
The opera titled Leningrad was composed in Samara in December 1941 and performed for the first time the following year. During the premiere, a German bombardment interrupted the exhibition, but Shostakovich immediately reassured his audience that he would return to play the second just as soon as the air raid stopped. Starting from this episode, the Leningrad soon became popular all over the world as a symbol of resistance against totalitarianism and militarism.
The symphony, apart from having a special significance for Shostakovich's biography, had the unique scope of bringing together the US and the Soviet Union, even though in the Western countries Russians were thought to be villain people. Furthermore, the American public relations machine joined the Soviet propaganda aimed at portraying the Seventh Symphony as a symbol of cooperation and spirit of both peoples in their fight.
The final meeting between Stalin and Roosevelt occurred on the 4th of February 1945 in Yalta. Roosevelt wanted the Soviet Union to participate in the offensive against Japan, which remained the last threatening Axis power. In continuation with his realpolitik thinking, Stalin sought a sphere of influence in the area of Manchuria. The Big Three agreed to this demand of Stalin.
Following the war, Soviet and American relations went to another sour speculation that would last multiple decades. However, the moment that would go down in history was the fact that Elbow Day brought them closer to stop the common enemy. If President Roosevelt hadn't helped the Soviet Union in 1941 before they officially entered the war, they possibly would not have formed their alliance to take down Germany and ultimately the horrors of the war.
After the Second World War, another conflict began between the Soviet Union and the United States, called the Cold War. It refers to pressure between nations, where each side implements strategies intended to reinforce and to deteriorate the enemy.
From the point of view of an Italian student like me, an epoch-making 44-year conflict like this would deserve more attention in schools and in the media. It would be interesting and useful to analyze the consequences of this war to our lives, and at the same time to today's geopolitics. What I wanted to show is how these two superpowers, starting from their heads of state, have tried to convince people all around the world that their ideas, their ways of doing things were the best, assuming that the ones who agreed that the rival system were manipulated or controlled by means of fear, and that they had to liberate people from this yoke.
And still, even nowadays, the bonding generated by Shostakovich's music survives as a symbol of international political and cultural defiance against all forms of oppression. In the years following the Second World War, many songwriters did actually follow Shostakovich's path of composing songs against all sorts of conflicts, which later happened to become eternal hymns to peace.
Speaking about the peacetime, it is important to mention that many positive events have happened. For instance, on the 24th of July 1959 in Moscow, at the opening of the American National Exhibition in Sokolniki Park, US Vice President Richard Nixon and the Soviet Prime Minister Nikita Khrushchev would be engaged in the kitchen debate. It is there, inside the kitchen of a perfectly recreated half-cut Yankee house, that the two heads of state talked about their impressions of each other's culture and society, good-naturedly joking about the superiority of one system over the other.
Moreover, in the second half of the 20th century, Pepsi Cola became a strong symbol of the tent, so that Mikhail Gorbachev's Perestroika was renamed Pepsi-Stroika. Coca-Cola finally entered the Soviet market in 1980, when the firm offered $10 million to sponsor Moscow Olympic Games.
After the war, American economy was booming once again. Women were gaining more rights. The quality of life in America was significantly better than how it was during the Depression. Furthermore, the narrative shifts when you look at it through the Russian point of view. The Second World War was called the Great Patriotic War, where Russia played a very important role in defeating Hitler's army.
Despite the loss of over 70 million lives throughout the entire world, the United States and the Soviet Union were able to successfully overcome overwhelming odds and secure victory in what would become known as the deadliest conflict in human history.
The daring courage and fortitude of men and women of the United States and Soviet Union shaped today's world. It is the duty of today's generation to remember their sacrifices and prevent deadly confrontations.
In conclusion, both the Soviet Union and America made a huge contribution to the victory over Nazi Germany. The evil was defeated owing to coherence, resilience, strength, and courage of the Allied countries. In this project, we considered essays of American and Russian students, analyzed their opinions and their views on historical facts connected with the Second World War. By creating this film, we have highlighted that all mankind is ready to forget about differences and misunderstandings and to unite for the sake of one goal. Interactions of the USSR and the USA during the war shows us strength and the unity of spirit and purpose despite different mentalities. We hope that this project will not allow us to forget the exploits of our ancestors and promote friendly relations between our two countries.